All right, I'm going to put this at the beginning. Hey, so this is Neil, and I'm going to tell you my testimony of how I went from atheism, or even an anti-theist, a true atheist, you'll see. I was a true diehard atheist, to Catholicism, which just seems so impossible. So impossible. But what's important first is I just want to briefly mention why I'm wearing these headphones, because this is my best mic that I have that I use for usually recording a lot of my videos. And it's my gaming mic. It's an expensive mic. I do have a boom mic I could use that is good, but I have to then try to block out sound in the background and stuff. This is just easier and more convenient. So sorry, I'm gonna look like a gamer. And then the glasses. So these are actually blue blocker glasses, and I'm wearing them because this light is very bright. This camera takes a lot of light, and so that's very, very bright in here. So sorry about that. Let's get started. All right, so with that said, I would like to say a quick prayer. Just in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Bless all who listen to this testimony that it may touch their heart. For your glory, God. Amen. All right, hey, I'm Neil, and this is my testimony of how I went from a hardcore atheist, hater of the Bible, at least I really talked about in a very bad way, known as an anti-theist. I turned a lot of people away from the God of the Old Testament. Have mercy on me. But I'm reconciling that. And so here's how I went from atheism to Catholicism. I think it's good if I start back with a brief, very, very brief overview of my kind of life with religion. So when I was 4 or 5 years old, my best friend across the street, I would stay the night every Saturday just about, and then on Sunday they would go to Spanish Mass, Catholic Church. I didn't know Spanish, so I didn't understand anything they were saying, but nonetheless, I went. It's kind of funny, actually. For the longest time, I thought that I wasn't good enough because I couldn't understand God's language. I thought they were speaking God's language, and I tried so hard to understand it. And I remember asking Teresa, which was his mother's name, I said, how come I don't understand God's language? Am I bad? And he goes, oh, mijo, they're speaking Spanish. So that was funny. And I felt much better after that. But I never accepted the idea of Jesus at that time. Didn't believe in Jesus at all. I did believe in God, but it wasn't because they told me about it. I knew God before I ever even met my friend. I knew him ever since I was very, very young. I actually remember going back to these years. For me, God was not in a place. I didn't think of God as being in the sky as most children would. You would think that would be normal, but I didn't see God that way. I'm not going to claim I saw God as omnipresent or something like that, because that wasn't an idea or concept in my mind at this age. But I did have this concept that God was just there with me. It wasn't here sitting on my bed or here next to me. He was just there in my presence, and I would feel the presence of God sometimes. So that was God for me. And this was super important to my testimony, which is why I'm spending the time to go through this. And so it wasn't until about 8 years old or so that I met a Protestant friend, and I went to church with him, and I think it was maybe one of the pastors, or maybe it was a youth pastor or something, came and talked to me about Jesus, told me some of the story of Jesus, the gospel, and I accepted Jesus. I did some prayer, and I accepted him into my heart, and I actually believed in Jesus, because it's not hard to convince a child to believe in things. I mean, you can convince a child at 8 years old to probably, maybe could still teach him to believe in Santa, but most people give that up by that age. Nonetheless, though, it's not hard to convince an 8-year-old of things. But what he couldn't convince me of is that Jesus was God. That's just something that just didn't make sense to me. And so I rejected this idea. And so instead, when I would talk to Jesus, I would say something like, Jesus, I don't know what to say to you, but can you ask God to answer my prayer, since God's not hearing me right now? So it was like Jesus was kind of a super friend of God. And I would ask Jesus, hey, can you pray on my behalf? Anyway, so then fast forward much more into my life, I kept this relationship with God. I prayed to God all the time about everything. Even though I was a sinner and I would fornicate and do things like this, I always kept my relationship with God. And I was baptized Catholic, by the way, when I was really young. And I think that had a huge help in me having that relationship with God. Anyway, so I would stay in relation with God all the time. I'd ask him things like, God, if you don't want me to be with this girl, like if I was dating someone, if you don't, this is like when I was a teenager, if you don't want me to date this girl, then please break us up somehow or give me some sign to let me know that we shouldn't be together. And I would accept that and I would obey. Yet I was still a sinner. I was still doing things I shouldn't be doing. And I wasn't like super religious, but I always talked with God every day. God was like my best friend. And so we're about to get to a really important part of my testimony. I really needed to lay that groundwork. And so I ended up joining what was known as the United Pentecostal Church International. They have broke up since then, but at the time they were known as the United Church Pentecostal. They're basically oneness Pentecostals. But the one thing, this was when I was about 18. I'm now 45. There was one thing that the church was never able to convince me of, and that was that Jesus was God. I just couldn't accept this idea. Right, so that idea from childhood carried all the way over into adulthood, or at least into young adulthood. I just couldn't accept this idea that Jesus was God. For me, God was something incomprehensible, transcendental, not a man, nothing like a man. And so that just didn't work for me. And so what I end up eventually agreeing upon with the church, that is the Pentecostal church, the oneness doctrine, modalism, was that God chose to dwell in Christ, who was fully a human being, and dwelt in him fully so that he can influence the man to do holy and righteous things. And then there's one more step I took. The closest I ever came to believing Jesus was God at that time was, I was like, I will agree then that Jesus was just a puppet. And God just used the flesh like a puppet. In this case, he couldn't have his own soul. Otherwise, that would go against his free will. So Jesus wasn't really a person. He was just a puppet that God used. That was as close as I ever came to saying Jesus was God. Because I couldn't accept that God actually incarnated. So then let's fast forward to when I took a vow for God. And I took 11-year vow for God, a Nazarite vow, but more than that, I mainly took a vow not to fornicate anymore. Because I was like, God, I love you and I want to be obedient, and I know fornication isn't something I'm supposed to do, but I can't do it on my own. I'm weak and I'll continue to fornicate. So please, God, just remove that desire from me. Just take the desire from me to do this thing so that I can be obedient. And this is a true story. This actually happened. So while I was in the act of sexual intercourse with my girlfriend at the time, God removed the desire. I just suddenly had no desire. I didn't want to be doing the act. It felt wrong to me and just like, I don't like this at all. And so I just kind of gently pushed her off, and not pushed her, I kind of like, guided her off of me. And then I went outside and I praised Jesus, and she probably thought I was a lunatic because God actually answered my prayer. And I stayed celibate for 11 years. For 11 years, I stayed faithful to that, and I was tempted all kinds of ways. Like, it was crazy how many women came out of the everywhere that wanted me once I became celibate. It was like, for me at the time, it was like a confirmation that God has answered me and he's removed this desire from me, and this is all the devil trying to tempt me. Well, I've been meditating since I was a little, maybe 10 years old, and it was something I did pretty regularly. I meditated. But what I didn't do is I didn't meditate with God. I just meditated. I just kind of cleared my mind and tried to think about nothing. And it was a kind of transcendental meditation. This is super important. I highly recommend not to do this. Do not practice transcendental meditation if you want to retain a relationship with God. Any meditation you do, make sure it's with God. I only meditate with the rosary now. You're going to understand why in a moment. So every now and again, when I would meditate, I would see like a portal in my mind's eye, a kind of whirling, swirling of colors. And I would feel like I was being sucked into this portal. And my mind, my consciousness felt like it was expanding and getting bigger and bigger. Like right now, maybe your mind just kind of feels like it's around your head a little bit, right? It felt like it grew like as big as the house, and then it just growing bigger and bigger, right? And as I was getting sucked into this thing, and I would get scared because I'm like, am I dying? What's happening right now? And I would pull myself out of the meditation. Well, one day, while meditating, the portal opened. I was listening to some tape, not a tape actually, it was like a video online. And I was listening to this video online. I think it was in the very early days of YouTube before Google bought them out. And I was listening. It was like, I think it was a female, and she was just telling me like, go with the flow and just let it happen. And for some reason, I didn't fear this time. The portal opened, my mind expanded, got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I got sucked into it. And then boom, I was no longer here on earth. I was in what seemed like the expanse of my knowledge, which felt like as big as the universe. I felt as though I remembered all my past lives and I knew everything that I've ever been. I was 1.88 billion years old. That's how old my soul was. This was real to me. But a bunch of other things were real to me. And those things should have let me know that this was false. But it felt also real to me. This is the part of the story that's so, so important. Along with that came a bunch of other knowledge. With this, I called it my awakening experience. And part of that was an argument and a knowing of how I became an atheist, how my soul became an atheist in between lives. So when I came back from this experience, I couldn't retain all the knowledge. I was only able to retain some of it because the human mind can only retain so much. And it felt so real to me. And when I came back, I felt like the ground wasn't beneath my feet. Like none of this was real because I came back an atheist. I lost God. This experience somehow, I had no intentions of being atheist before this. I wasn't slowly becoming atheist. I wasn't slowly doubting the existence of God. I was absolutely confident in God's existence. But something about this experience, like remembering how I became an atheist in between lives, in between reincarnations, like how my soul became atheist, was so utterly convincing that when I came back, I'm like, God's not real, and I lost my best friend, and it hurt so bad. I felt like I have no best friend right now. It was painful. It wasn't a good experience, this part. Losing God was painful. And this is very abnormal because people don't typically lose God in this fashion. But the experience, like I can't express enough how real the experience was, which I now understand to be a deception. Part of the knowledge that came to me was that Satan was actually the good guy and that the God of the Old Testament was an evil person, an evil entity, and not God at all, but a faker. Hold on a second. My something on my thing here just keeps going off, so I need to close this. Hopefully I remember to edit this out, but just in case I don't, sorry about that. Just took a second to do that. And so that's the part that should have set off alarms, right? And it kind of did. I kind of went, that's odd. Satan's the good guy. Now, I don't want to get into this whole thing because I don't want it to ever convince anyone else, but like Satan came to me in visions, quote unquote, as this angel of light and told me his point of the story and justified how he's actually the good guy and how he's not stupid. He would never fight against God and how God doesn't actually exist. The being that pretends to be God is not actually God. Anyway, somehow this was all very convincing to me, which is why I recommend do not practice this kind of meditation. Meditate with God only. Meditate on the Word of God and meditate with God through rosary prayer or something. That's what I do now every day. Almost every day. Sometimes I miss days. So this led me into this anti-theism. I was very, very against the God of the Old Testament. I was never against Jesus. Like, Jesus was a cool guy, but he was just a guy. He was one of the fellow spirits that reincarnate, and we disagree with each other. He thinks God is real. I don't. That was my belief. That was what I came back with in this quote unquote awakening experience. But the God of the Old Testament was evil, and he was a false God, a pretender, a demon. And so I would show verses in the Old Testament to show how evil he was, evil things he's done. And I converted a lot of people away from the Bible my sister being one of them. And there's nothing I can do now to make up for that except for try to show the ones that I still have access to, like my sister, to try to show them the way back. Luckily, she hasn't given up on God and didn't give up on Jesus, but she gave up on the Old Testament completely. But I think I can bring her back by talking about it and stuff. Anyway, so I was like that for many years, for a good 10 years at least. I was in this state of anti-theism. I would talk about how religion is stupid and God is stupid, and I would, when people would challenge me, oh, are you really an atheist? If you're really an atheist, why don't you ask God to strike you dead? And I would, because I had no fear. I didn't believe in God at all, not even a little bit. God was truly just gone from me. I never experienced, well, actually, in the very beginning, sometimes I would still experience that kind of feeling of God. And under my new belief system, I just kind of said it must be some spirit between reincarnations or something. But it wasn't God, because God was unreal. For me, this was the analogy I used, and this is a true analogy. I can tell you with, in all honesty, this is how it was. You know how when you believed in Santa, perhaps when you were a kid, and then at some point it became real to you that Santa was not real? Like you realized, oh man, Santa's fake. And now as an adult, you're like, I can never believe in Santa again. Like, what would it take for you to ever believe in Santa again, right? Santa is just so utterly fake to you. That's how God was to me. God was like Santa. And I used to say things like that as an atheist, like, I can never be a theist again. It's just not possible. Once you awaken to this idea, once you know that it's fake, you can never be convinced of it again. And I was convinced of that. I can never be convinced of God again. How? God is just so utterly dumb and fake to me. The idea and religion was just so dumb, and especially Catholicism, because when I was a Protestant, I was anti-Catholic. As a United Pentecostal, I was anti-Catholic. I bought into some chick comic type stuff, and I was very anti-Catholic, anti-Trinitarian, because I was a modalist, although I never could quite accept modalism. So I had a workaround, like I said. But everything else was, just God interacting with man in different ways and modes. There was no Trinity, right? So I was very against the Trinity, outspoken against it, debating against it. I had many debates on Pal Talk, like official debates. I debated once with Matt Slick. Debated once. We had a huge room full of people with Lou Rugg. Very, very against the Trinity and the Catholic Church. And I was very against the idea of God and religion. I used to say things like, religion's dumb. Humanity would be better without religion. It dumbs us down. It makes us stupid as a society. Your typical atheist stuff that you hear from non-philosophical atheists, your Pal Talk kind of atheist, your YouTube kind of atheist, not like the sophisticated atheists like Graham Oppy. And then this is where everything started to shift on me. So I was like that for like a good 10 years, maybe a little bit longer actually. At least 10 years actually, because during the entire time I was with my wife was 10 years, and I was an atheist that entire time until just recently. So maybe like 13 years, something like that. Anyway, so what happened is I've always liked philosophy, and I kind of put it off for a long time, but I would kind of look at stuff here and there. Never really took it too seriously, but I read some books by Plato and stuff, and I really liked it. And that was in my 20s when I did that. It was like 20, 21, 22, and then I kind of just kind of didn't think about it a lot. And about 2 years ago now, from this date, so right now it is 6/25/2023. So it's 2023, and it is June 25th. So about 2 years ago or so, I came across this YouTube series. I can forget the college that produces it. I think it starts with the W. I think it's a Catholic college, actually. It's definitely a Christian college. And the professor was teaching the history of religion, the history of philosophy. And he goes all the way back and starts with the early ancient Greek philosophers, Heraclitus and things like that. When he got to Aristotle, something just clicked in my mind. He started talking about the difference between Aristotle and Plato and Aristotle's metaphysics and this idea of forms and universals and all this kind of stuff. And it all just made sense to me. I'm like, this just seems right. And then I started studying stuff on the side while I was still going through this lecture series. It was actually just recorded in the class. So these were the lectures he gave to his students at university, and it was like 80 hours worth. And I watched all of it, and then some of it I rewatched. I rewatched the parts of Aristotle several times, and the parts when I got to Aquinas, which I'll get into in a second. So I was studying Aristotle and looking at his works. I ended up reading all of his book Metaphysics, and I became convinced of this idea of his metaphysics. It just made sense, and I had to slightly alter my views, but not very much. But it was just like this is like the metaphysics, but everything else still followed the same. I didn't really have any consequences like that would make it to where it's impossible. And then I had to change my idea of the whatever was the eternal stuff that allows for existence to be. And so I had to incorporate Aristotle's idea of actus purus. Well, that came the Latin. This idea that God is pure existence itself. God is pure actuality without potentiality. And so that slightly altered my view, because now instead of this force I believed in as an atheist being like a kind of eternal force that causes all things to be, which is definitely not God, right? Because it doesn't have a mind. It's like the force on Star Wars. You can't pray to it or talk to it. It can't talk to you. It can't interact with the world in any way. Personally, it just is the cause of things that exist. It's the eternal cause, but without mind or anything like that. And so I had to slightly alter that because I thought it was a natural thing, right? It was the natural substance that is just there. And then it became the supernatural substance that is just there. But it was still the same, like it was still without a mind. I called it the impersonal God because I said, if Aristotle calls it God, I'm going to call it God, right? And so I started becoming comfortable with that word again, the word God, except I defined it in this very impersonal way. God is not a mind. He doesn't have thoughts. He doesn't think. He doesn't care. He doesn't answer prayers because he doesn't have a mind, right? He doesn't hear you. It's just an information data bank that causes things to be, and it's outside of the world. It has its own ontological existence. Then I came across in that course lecture series, we came across Aquinas, and I just fell in love with Aquinas. I didn't agree with any of his religious ideas. I thought those were stupid, but I liked the way his mind worked. I liked the way he broke things down and explained things. And so I started to read his Summa Theologica. I'm like, wow, this is really good. He was a deep thinker. This guy was a genius, right? And the more I studied about his life and what he did, he used to write 4 books at once. Well, he didn't write them. He would dictate them. So he had 4 scribes around him. He would turn to this scribe and say, he's working on one specific book, and he would, tell him the next couple sentences for that book, and then he would turn to the next scribe, and then on a totally different book, and tell him the next sentences for that book, and then the third scribe. So he was like working on 4 books at once, and sometimes only 3 books at once. That's why he was so prolific, and has such a huge library of works, which I have not read all of them, only a fraction. And so I just really liked his ideas, right? And I like debating, right? I've been debating on Pal Talk and online for years back in Yahoo Chat. And so I'm like, hey, this is good stuff. Like, if it ever comes up that we're discussing Catholicism, I can at least argue from Aquinas' point of view, which I did. Even though I didn't believe it, I could at least argue from his point of view. Like, look, it's logical, right? Because he made a very logical case for it. And the one that really blew my mind was he made a logical case for the Trinity. And I was like, hey, this isn't the Trinity like I thought of the Trinity, like God is an egg and all this kind of stuff you hear from Protestants. This is a very sophisticated understanding of Trinity. And I do have a video on that. And he convinced me that the Trinity was logical. I had to concede that, well, at least it's a logical idea. It doesn't mean it's true, but it's at least logical. Well, eventually I came to know that, well, if God has a mind, anything like a mind, anything analogous to a mind, which I started to kind of accept, like maybe God has something like a mind, but he just doesn't interact with the world. He doesn't answer prayers. He only contemplates his own self, like Aristotle talked about. And it's like an eternal reflection that doesn't extend to the world. So he still doesn't answer prayers or anything like that. But I thought, if that's true, if God has anything like a mind, then Aquinas' argument for the Trinity goes through. I have to accept that God's triune, that God is Trinity, because triune is different. And I was like, that's impossible, because if that's true, then, well, the Catholics are the only people that ever come to this, right? Aristotle came close. Philosophically, he came close to understanding like the philosophical necessity of Trinity. which I can talk about in another video. But I saw this necessity that it has to be true. It has to be there. I'm not going to go all into that here. Just check out the other video on the Trinity or my website at freelymeditate.com, which is going to change eventually. Just I have to wait till it runs out. But I'm keeping all my stuff there so people can see the journey I took. Anyway, so I had this kind of internal conflict happening a little bit because I'm like, well, the Catholics are the only people to ever come up with this idea of Trinity. And yet it seems necessary to believe in. And so in the back of my head, that was kind of turning the back of my head. The other thing that was turning the back of my head is what Aristotle ended up destroying for me was the argument that I remembered during this awakening experience. The argument against God, which had to deal with God and time. Well, that argument turned out to be false, right? It's defeatable. I thought it was indefeatable, but it turned out it was defeatable. I'm like, well, wait a minute. If I remembered this awesome piece of knowledge that is the very thing that made me stop believing in God, and it's wrong, well, maybe God does exist. So it got me from thinking God is impossible, because that's what I used to teach. I used to teach that God is just impossible. God cannot exist. So I would take the positive atheist argument and argue against the existence of God. And Aristotle kind of broke all that down. Then I started looking at other philosophers and stuff, and I'm like, oh, wow, it's actually, God is possible. Like, logically, God could exist. It's not an impossibility. And so that kind of humbled me and made me think, okay, maybe I'm wrong, obviously. So maybe God exists. And since I was wrong about that, maybe I'm wrong about other things. What if I'm wrong about other things in this awakening experience? And I started to reevaluate my awakening experience again. What if I'm wrong about Satan? What if I'm wrong about all this other stuff? And so that kind of opened me up to being open more. I wasn't so closed off anymore. Not open enough to pray to God or anything like that, because I didn't think God existed, but I was open enough. I was opening up. And so what I did is I came across Shia LaBeouf's story with the rosary. And then I remember people saying Catholics worship Mary and stuff like that. I'm like, well, if I'm going to, because what happened is I started to defend and debate for just academic purposes only, for, I don't know, ego, whatever it was. I would argue the Catholic position because I was reading Aquinas and I liked Aquinas, and it was not that difficult to argue for. And people just really misunderstand the Catholic position. And I became very acute of this, like they're accusing them of worshiping Mary and stuff. I'm like, well, what if they do though? So let me go and look at the rosary. So I decided I would study the rosary because I wanted to see, do Catholics really worship Mary? And if so or if not, I can argue for or against that, right? I can show that. Basically, it's just for future conversations on Pal Talk. I could have this knowledge available to me for the debate, because at the time I was ignorant of it. I couldn't really respond or comment on that topic when it came up. So I'm like, I'm going to go study this so I can comment on this topic when it comes up. Upon doing that, I studied like 3 or 4 hours. I came to the conclusion they don't worship Mary. In fact, it seems like the rosary is all focused on Jesus. All right, so what I found in my study was that they definitely don't worship Mary. Nothing about the rosary suggested worshiping of Mary. In fact, even when they say the Hail Mary part of the rosary, doing the 10 decades on the 10 beads, and I say it 10 times, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for sinners now and the hour of our death. Amen. Even that, you're focusing on Jesus the entire time. The meditation is on the Passion of Christ, depending on what mystery you're on. So what became clear to me then, at least with the rosary, is that there's no indication here that Catholics worship Mary. And I felt satisfied. That was as far as I planned to take it, because I had the information I needed, and now I can use that when the discussion comes up on Pal Talk. Well, what happened was something I didn't expect at all. So that night I have this dream. This woman is in my dream, although she appears very young. And she's glowing, right? She's in a crowd of people and she's glowing, and there's 2 people with her, but I don't really pay attention to who they are because I'm so focused on her glory that she had, this glow that she has about her. And I just feel this comfort and this peace, and I just want to be as close to her as possible. And so I get as close to her as I can as possible. And I just follow her and I just want to be with her. And I know there's two other people with her, but I don't know who they are because I don't even pay attention to them. And at one point she has to leave. And I'm like, wait, no, can I go with you? And she's like, you can't. And I'm like, oh, I don't want I just wanted to be around her. And like, will I see you again? And she's like, perhaps. And then she leaves. I tell this to a Catholic friend of mine. And he's like, you are so blessed. You got to experience Mary. And I had my suspicions this could be Mary, but I wasn't sure. Like, I don't know if this is Mary or not. But the dream was so powerful. It moved me so much that it convinced me to at least try the rosary. It didn't make me believe at all, but I thought, I gotta at least try the rosary now. Like that experience, this dream just was so heavy on me to the point where I'm like, okay, the only way I think I'm going to satisfy this feeling not go away is if I just try to pray the rosary. It's almost like I was being compelled to do it. I was like, okay, finally I was like, okay, I'll buy a rosary and I'll try it. So I bought a rosary, had it blessed and all that, and tried it. The first thing I thought was, this is going to be boring, right? Because I had studied the rosary, so I know exactly what was coming, right? I knew about 20 minutes of prayer, and I'm going to be saying Hail Mary 10 times, and Our Father, and Glory be in between. And this is going to be so boring. I'm just going to be honest with you. Forgive me, oh God. But that's what I thought, right? I thought this is going to be so utterly boring. I don't want to do this now. Why did I agree to do this? But I felt like compelled to do it. So I'm like, okay, I'll do it, right? Keep in mind, I'm still fully atheist. There's no personal God to me. Right? I'm willing to talk about God's existence, but as this force that doesn't answer prayers or hear you. And most people are like, why do you even call that God? That's not God. And I used to, even this Jewish woman I know, we debate about it. And I could see her point now, like, yeah, it kind of isn't God, but I use the word God anyways, even though it was a thing, an it. I used to call it it. It doesn't have a will or a mind, at least not a mind like that would interact with things. Like it had like some eternal processing or something. I talked about like a computer. Anyway, so when I prayed the rosary, I had no concept of God like that. I didn't believe anything like that. To me, that was so unbelievably dumb. This idea that God answers prayers, and the whole idea that Catholicism might be true just seems so far from me and unreal to me. There's no way I can believe that. But at least it was logical. Aquinas at least made it all make logical sense, but there's no way I can believe it, right? Just because something's logical, a unicorn could be argued to be logical, but it's just not believable. I still don't believe in unicorns. So something being logical isn't grounds to believe in it. And anyway, so what surprised me is I prayed the rosary, and it didn't take forever. I mean, it took 20 minutes, but it didn't feel like 20 minutes. It was not boring. Quite the opposite. I was full of peace and comfort, and I just felt so good praying it. And I was like, you know what? If the rosary does that, I'll pray it again. So at this point, I felt like I completed that compulsion I had to at least try the rosary once, and I did it. I'm like, okay, that's satisfied. I don't have to ever pray it again because I feel like I satisfied the dream. But it was such a peaceful experience. I'm like, you know what? This is an awesome experience. This might be better than meditation. I want to try it again, see if I can get that same thing again. So the next day I tried it again. Once again, I get this peace and this awesome experience. I'm like, this is fantastic. If I'm going to keep getting this kind of benefit from it, I'll keep praying the rosary. It's only 20 minutes. It actually takes me less time to start feeling this kind of awesome experience than it does with meditation. So it seems superior to meditation. And I'm like, I'll just do this then if it continues to work, because meditation doesn't always work. And I thought, this is fantastic, right? Of course, it didn't change my mind at all about believing or anything like that. But one day I was praying the glorious mysteries, which have now become my favorite mysteries. They were my mysteries today for today is Sunday, which is why I decided to record this video, because Sundays are not for working and stuff, and this doesn't work. I don't make any money off my channel. It's demonetized and so on. This is to help spread the testimony. I've been wanting to record this and I haven't. So I'm praying the rosary, and I get to the fourth mystery of the glorious mysteries, which is the Assumption of Mary. And while I'm praying the Hail Marys and meditating upon this thing, which I don't believe in, right? I'm saying the words, I don't believe in them, but I'm like, you know what? I got to a point, I need to back up a bit because I forgot to mention something. I got to a point where I'm like, okay, God, maybe I'm wrong, right? I've been wrong about you being impossible, so you're at least possible, which is the only reason why I'm even bothering to ask this, because maybe you exist, even though you seem so unreal to me. But I said, okay, God, I think I'm humble enough right now to at least ask you to show me if you exist. And I said, I'm not asking for a miracle, because if you give me a miracle, I'm just going to write it off like I did before. And I forgot to mention this part, but many, many years ago, I was very, very sick and I got healed, and I thought that would be enough. This was when I was an atheist, and I thought it'd be enough to believe in God, but it wasn't. And I was like, sorry, God, I lied. I can't believe in you. You're just not real to me. So even when I got a legitimate miracle, like legitimately, I knew it was a miracle. I knew that something fantastical happened. I just blamed it on spirits between reincarnations. I didn't give no glory to God for that. And glory be to God now, because now I know he's who actually healed me. But I just couldn't believe in God. So I'm like, God, even like if you give me a miracle of some sort, I'm going to write it off. I'm going to think maybe it was aliens that did it, or I'm going to have some excuse. Maybe spirits between reincarnations. At this time, I still believed in my reincarnations and all that. I didn't doubt any of that stuff. So I'm like, okay, God, if you're real, I don't know what you can do. I was trying to think, like, what could God honestly do to convince me that he exists? And I was like, I can't think of anything. So I just said, God, just grant me the faith to know you. That's how I worded it. I think the way I should talk about it now is more like, I ask God to grant me the grace to know he exists, to experience him on some deep, intimate, mystical level that cannot be denied. Right? To experience God in such a way that even the most skeptical mind can't reject him. Like even Satan can't reject God, right? Even though he is who he is, he knows that God exists. Demons know God. So I'm like, just let me know you, God. That'll work. If you just renew in me a new mind and a new heart and a new spirit, that I can just know you. If you can do that, then I will believe, obviously. And if I believe, I will serve you. I will find my way back to you, and I will serve you. So while praying the rosary, and I'm on the fourth mystery, the Assumption of Mary, God reveals himself to me in this magical way, in this mystical way that's undeniable. It was like, here's the best analogy I can give. Imagine that you don't believe in like love at first sight. You don't believe in falling in love, right? You heard about it, you read about it, you saw it on movies, but you just don't believe it's real. And you're adamant on this. It's just a chemical reaction. It's dependency, whatever. It's a attachment, and you just don't believe in it. And then one day you fall in love. Like you actually experience love, you fall in love, and at that moment, you then suddenly realize how utterly wrong you were. It doesn't take time to come to know you were wrong. You don't come slowly to know you're wrong. You just instantaneously, the moment you experience that thing that you doubted, that is this love, the moment you experience that, you go, oh, I was so utterly wrong. Like this is real, because you're experiencing it. That's how it was for me. Boom, I experienced God in such a way that I just couldn't reject it. It was like, oh, God, I am so utterly wrong. I've been so utterly wrong. And I remembered the people I told, like my sister and stuff, that God's not real, and how, the God of the Old Testament is fake. And all that came to me, and I just felt so unworthy. And I was like, God, I was thankful. God, thank you. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel so utterly unworthy of it. And I remember thinking, God, there's so many other people more worthy of this than me that have faith. I mean, there are people out there right now that already believe in you, but they just want this kind of confirmation. Like, God, that they deserve it more than I do. That's how I felt. Why me, God, of all the people? But I knew God. And this changed me profoundly. And this was a good thing. Unlike when I thought I realized that God was fake, that was painful. This was awesome. I'm back with God again. I have a relationship with God again, and I could talk with God again, and that's fantastic because I hadn't had that in so long. And I felt great just being able to talk to God again and have that relationship. But it came with some turmoils. And those turmoils, because I wasn't Catholic, right? I didn't pray to be Catholic. That just seems so far beyond me, right? Like God seems so far beyond me. And I know I said, God, don't give me a miracle because that's not going to convince me. But in a way, that was the miracle. The miracle was that God so profoundly caused me to believe in him, by whatever mystical thing he did. He let me know him in such a way that I couldn't reject it, that I would have to believe. And that experience was so powerful that it caused me to believe. And that opened me up, obviously, to this idea of Catholicism. Okay, if God's real, then maybe religion's real. And I had already thought about this as an atheist. I thought, what if God is real? What religion would there be? Would God even have a religion? Like, that is, if God was personal and actually cared about man, would he bother giving them a religion? If he did, what religion would it be? And I started to narrow it down. I'm like, okay, it would be obviously a big religion because God would be successful. God wouldn't just start some hole-in-the-wall religion that has like 5 followers, and those 5 followers are like, cult members or something. Like, that's not going to be what it is. So I ruled out all the little religions. That really only leaves like 3 religions: Christianity, Islam, and maybe Buddhism or Hinduism. Well, I can write those off right away because none of those follow classical theism, and that's what I was convinced of, not classical theism. This is the whole thing, right? So classical theism versus personal theism means this: God is not a being among beings. God is being itself. God is existence itself. And his essence is his existence. And this gets into the whole thing, but it's divine simplicity and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't think of it as personal, right? So it was a very impersonal view of it, kind of like Aristotle, but even less personal than Aristotle's version of this. And Plato, like the one, right? A very impersonal idea of God. Anyway, so I can rule those religions out because they don't have anything close to that concept of actus purus, of this idea that God is this existence itself. So I can rule those out. Judaism I can rule out because they failed. If any of this was true, like it could be true in the sense that they were like the forerunners of Christ, but like obviously not the truth now. So I can easily rule that out. And they're such a small 0.01% of the world. That's not what God wants to me in my mind. I'm like, that's not what God would want if he had a religion. He wants something successful. So really that just left Christianity and Islam. That's it. I was able to rule out Islam because Islam is not historically accurate, right? It goes against the historicity of Jesus. So that was easy to kind of dismiss. And that really just left Christianity. Well, of all those faiths in Christianity, Catholicism is the only one that made sense to me, because if God was going to bother to incarnate and start a religion and die for man, as Christianity says and teaches, he's going to protect his church, right? As Jesus said, he set up the heavenly kingdom is here. God's kingdom is here on earth. He set that up as the church. He's not going to just let that not be the church anymore and let it fall away. And then 1400 years later, let's bring up the Protestant Reformation. Oh, now truth is here under evangelicalism. No, that doesn't make sense to me. I thought all this as an atheist. So once I had that experience with God, and I knew God now, had a relationship with God, it's like, okay, God, you're personal and you care, but what is the faith? And it seems like, based on the logic I already ran through when I was an atheist, it would be Catholicism. But God, if you're calling me to Catholicism, this was a hard pill to swallow. This is hard. And my friend on Pal Talk, a Catholic, said, God's going to bring you to the faith, I think, but you're going to come kicking and screaming. And oh, how true that was. So a lot of things are happening in my mind. I'm like, okay, God, I have a relationship with you again. I'm praying to you again. I'm so thankful for that. But I can't believe in the resurrection. I can't believe in the incarnation. I've never been able to believe in the incarnation, right? My entire life with you, when I had a relationship with you before, I couldn't believe in that. I can't believe in that. I don't know how to believe in these things. And Catholicism is just so unreal to me, God. Like Aquinas is awesome, and I love his mind, and he was a Catholic, and he puts a good case for Catholic ideas and stuff, but I just don't know how to believe in it. So I was at this kind of turmoil. I'm like, God, I feel like you're guiding me to the church because many different things were happening. Like, for example, the rosary. I'm like, why would God give me such peace and comfort while praying the rosary? Why is the rosary so awesome? Why the Mary dream? Why is it that out of all times where God could have answered my prayer, right, where God could have revealed himself to me in that powerful way that caused me to know God exists and have that relationship with him again, he could have done that any time. Why did he do it while I was praying the rosary and meditating on the Assumption of Mary, right? That is uniquely a Catholic doctrine, right? And then I was thinking back to the idea of the Trinity and how it's a necessity philosophically, but that had huge implications now, because now I know that God is personal. Now I know that God actually answers prayers, because he answered my prayer. So how do I reconcile this idea of Trinity now? Because now I'm thinking, okay, Trinity's true, it has to be, it's like a philosophical necessity, but God is personal. That changes things. How do I deal with this? Okay, God can be Trinity and be personal, and maybe not have a religion. Maybe he just doesn't give man a religion. And then I thought about the Mary thing, and so I was really in this kind of turmoil. It was really bothering me. I felt like something was wrong, and I kept feeling drawn to the church in different ways. For example, one time I had a really bad migraine, and I wanted to pray the rosary because I've been trying to pray it every day and mostly successful. And I woke up and I'm like, I want to pray the rosary, but I had this just migraine that just was so bad I just couldn't pray the rosary. And I started praying to God, and I said, God, I'm not asking for this migraine to go away because I can't handle the suffering. I'm willing to suffer. If you want, you can make the migraine come back. Can you please just make the migraine go away long enough for like 20 minutes so I can pray the rosary? Because I wanted to stay faithful to that, even though I wasn't a Catholic. It's how God revealed himself to me. It brought me peace and comfort. I wanted to continue to be faithful to it. I wanted to get that benefit out of it. And God removed the migraine completely. The thing with migraines, they don't just go away. It's not just like, there's the migraine and, the migraine's gone, I can pray now. The migraine goes away slowly. This is how migraines always have worked for me. They slowly go away. And then I get better and better. And then there's always this residual feeling that stays there for a good hour. None of that. It was just gone instantly. Gone. And the thing, what I said was to God is I said, okay, God, if you want me to pray the rosary, if this is something you want me to do, you're trying to guide me somewhere, then please, God, make this migraine go away so I can pray the rosary. And it did. And I was like, okay. But I still couldn't accept. I couldn't accept Catholicism, right? I couldn't accept this stuff. There's too much other stuff. I can't accept the resurrection. But I'm like, all right, God. And there's so many other things were happening that were leading me to the church. Okay, God, if you want me to go to the church, I can't be a heretic. I can't be a Christian and not know the resurrection. And so I did everything I could to try to see if the resurrection were true, to try to look at all the evidence to see if it can convince me. I looked at the minimalist facts argument. I looked at Lee Strobel's, case for Christ. I looked at all the evidence I can find, and it greatly increased my belief. In fact, it was a debate between William Lane Craig and Bart Ehrman, and it was something Bart Ehrman said that really switched my mind around. He said, he agrees these are the minimal facts, and he agrees to what those are. And then, if you don't know, please look up like Gary Habermas's minimal facts or Mike Lacona's minimal facts argument. They're all kind of the same. And in William Lane Craig's debate with Bart Ehrman, if you will. Bart Ehrman says something like, here's my answer to the minimal facts argument. Here's a possible answer. Is it right? Is it what actually happened? No, I don't believe that. I don't believe this is how it actually happened. I'm like, wait, what? That's weird. So he gives this natural explanation, then he says, but it's unbelievable. Even he doesn't believe it. And that did something to my brain. It made me go, well, wait a minute. I know God now. I'm not an atheist anymore. I know God exists. So miracles could happen. So the only reason why he doesn't accept the most clear answer that Christ resurrected is because he can't, because he doesn't believe in God. But I do believe in God. And so I thought that answer is plausible. Like Christ could have rose, but still, I mean, it rose my percent from I was maybe 5% confident in the resurrection of Christ to maybe 60% confidence if I had to put numbers on it. My confidence greatly grew and I thought, okay. But it was enough to believe, right? I'm like, God, I'm sorry. My faith sucks, man. I'm not faithful. I'm not good at faith. This is hard. I don't know how to believe. God, I need to be convinced. I don't know how to believe. I know I'm worse than Thomas or something. I'm not saying I need to touch Christ or see him. I'm not asking for any of that. I go, even then, maybe I wouldn't believe. Maybe I'd write it off or something. I was hallucinating. So God, you did it for me, for your existence. I know I'm asking a lot. Can you do it one more time? Can you just convince me? Can you just show me? Just put the knowledge in me that I can know and believe that Christ resurrected so I can know that's true, and I'll accept everything else. That's my word I give. I'll know then you're calling me to the church for sure. I'll follow the church. I'll dedicate myself. I'll go through RCIA. I'll do all that, which I am, by the way. I'll do all that. I'll believe in hell, though I find it unbelievable. I'll believe that gays are wrong, even though I think the better argument is that it's not wrong to be in love with someone of the same sex. I know Aquinas' arguments and all that, so you don't have to put it in the comments. I know all the arguments. And I'll believe all this stuff. And the most hard thing, I'll even accept the incarnation. Because Jesus said he would raise himself up, and I don't know how he can do that unless he's God. So if you convince me that he rose from the dead, as hard as I've never been able to accept your God, I will just accept the incarnation. You know what he did? Not only did he grant me to know that Christ resurrected, he granted me to know the incarnation. And the thing is, he didn't have to do that because I didn't ask. I just asked for the resurrection because I just couldn't believe. But he granted me to know the incarnation. And I said, okay, God. And that was enough. And I dedicated myself to Catholicism. Faithful to the church. And if it says hell is real, then hell is real. And I just have to accept that, even though it's hard for me to believe. I accept it. And my hope is like the Catechism says, my hope is that all will be saved. I have my own thoughts in it. I need to talk to a priest about it to see if it's not heresy. But anyway, that was my journey. That's how I became a Catholic. And if you are one of those people that just thinks God is so unbelievable and just so unreal, like I did, if you have any hope at all, if you could humble yourself at all, like I was able to, there were certain things in my life that let me do that. Maybe read Metaphysics by at least chapter 12 by Aristotle. If you can just humble yourself enough, because it has to be real and from the heart. You have to be truly willing to be wrong. And for the longest time, I wasn't truly willing to be wrong. But things happened and broke me down, as I talked about in this testimony. It was enough for me to go, okay, maybe I'm wrong. And to be willing to be wrong. That if God shows you you're willing to be wrong, and go before God and ask, God, renew in me a new mind, a new spirit, a new heart. Like, just let me know that you exist. Come to me in that way, in that powerful way that I know you're real, that I just have faith that you exist. Try that. See what happens. God answered my prayer. I didn't expect it. And you know what? I really didn't expect the resurrection thing. I thought, you know what? I'm going to be this kind of theist that's in constant turmoil. I'm never going to know whether Christ resurrected. I'm going to feel like called to the church because that felt like it wasn't going to go away. I was like being compelled, but at the same time, I'm like, I can't, because I can't be a Christian without the resurrection. I can't just be 60% convinced. That's not enough because I don't believe it. And Paul said, without the resurrection, our faith is for no reason. Our faith means nothing, right? We have no religion without the resurrection. So I realized the importance of it. But I didn't expect God to answer that. I started wondering, this is a prayer I'm not going to get answered because some time had passed, but God answered that prayer. So praise Jesus. And hey, I know it seems unbelievable to some people, but it's real. Like God can actually answer your prayers, no matter how skeptic you are, no matter how philosophically inclined you are. God can meet you there. So just try praying that. All right, that's it.